Electricast. Kaylee Cuoco and Sam Claflin star in the MGM Plus original series, Vanished. When the man Alice loves disappears on a train to the south of France, every romantic memory becomes evidence. Every intimate detail, a potential threat. She thought she knew everything about him, but she may not even know his real name. 4-part thriller Vanished premieres February 1st on MGM Plus. Finding the truth is a dangerous affair.
Welcome to Her Extraordinary Life by Design, where we celebrate women who are shaping their lives one extraordinary day at a time. I'm your host, Leslie Gaudet, self-care coach for women who are ready to make self-care a priority to support them in life and business. Every week, I'll be speaking with inspiring women from various walks of life who will share their personal journeys and will discover how they have fearlessly carved their own paths as business owners, passionately pursuing their dreams and creating a meaningful impact on their communities. So let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to our Extraordinary Life by Design podcast. I'm your host, Leslie Gaudet, and today I want to continue where I left off last week in my behind the scenes of my life of what I'm doing now. I wanted to do a part 2 to the behind the scenes of my life because I'm still inside it, right? And instead of waiting until everything feels finished or fully formed, I wanted to share what the season actually sounds like and feels like for me while I'm living inside of it. And just to be clear, I haven't figured everything out yet. I'm still in the dreaming phase. I'm still listening. I'm still noticing. I'm still letting things take shape as I lean into the creation of something incredibly important to me and what I believe is so needed today. In fact, lately, I've been sitting with a realization that surprised me a little, actually, something that really wasn't on my radar until recently when I started thinking about it. And it's what prompted me to record these 2 back-to-back behind-the-scenes episodes. You see, what I didn't realize until recently is how long I'd been living by an internal rule that made me believe that I should wait, that I should only speak once I'm certain, that I should only say it, meaning my ideas, out loud, only once I know that I won't be misunderstood, and that I can only decide and then move on the idea, the new evolution of me, once I'm sure my decision won't be questioned. And I didn't even think of that as fear at the time. I thought I was being careful, responsible, strategic, and that I was protecting myself and protecting the decision by waiting until I could explain it clearly and defend it if I had to. But what I see now is that this rule was shaping when I showed up, how I showed up, how much I shared, and even how long I stayed quiet, even when something inside of me already knew the direction that I was moving in, especially because it felt right for me. And on the surface, it sounded like the right thing for me to do, to be hesitant. But when I slowed down long enough to really look at it for what it was, I realized that certainty had become the price of being seen, and proof had become the requirement for movement. And once I saw that for what it was, I realized that belief didn't just slow me down, it kept me protecting my decisions instead of actually making them. And I spent way more energy managing how a decision might be received than actually trusting myself enough to make it. It's not like anyone told me that I had to be certain before I shared a vision or that I couldn't take action without having a complete plan. But I guess somewhere along the way, I started to believe that was a truth, that it was something I thought would keep me safe from failing, from criticism, from judgment, and from being misunderstood before I fully understood it myself. So I want to be really clear here about the lens of this episode, because what I'm now doing isn't about me burning things down or reinventing myself overnight. That's not what I've been doing, nor what I want to do, because I've learned so much about myself. And I know that there's parts of my journey, good and bad, that have helped shape my new vision and my evolution. It's also not about honoring an internal rule that I thought once served me, because if I'm being honest, it didn't really serve me at all, right? Because all it did was falsely protect me from visibility, because being truly seen felt scary and unsafe. It delayed decisions, and it gave fear a respectable name. Now, what I'm actually doing now is noticing that rule for what it was. It was an excuse that kept me from trusting myself fully. And now I'm choosing to listen more closely to my own voice before fear has a chance to limit what I know that I'm capable of. And from my experience, sometimes what looks like patience or constantly being in strategy mode is actually fear, not panic fear, not the obvious fear, the kind that sounds like, let me just wait a little longer. Let me be sure before I say it out loud. Let me protect my decision until I know it can't be questioned. And I guess that's what I've been noticing in myself lately. And if you're someone who carries that responsibility, where you're used to being the capable one, who's often expected to already know what's next, I want you to lean in here and listen in to see if you can recognize a similar pattern in yourself, one that you might be living inside. Maybe it'll prompt you to take a closer look at your fears, your doubts, or habits that aren't serving you. Because, like I shared last week, I realized that I had stopped hearing my inner knowing, what I call my inner canary. And I didn't notice it right away, that my voice, she didn't disappear. She just got quieter and quieter until one day I had stopped listening altogether, and I hadn't even noticed when it happened. So, this is me thinking out loud in real time and letting you hear what it sounds like for me to lead myself while things are still forming, without forcing clarity, without rushing certainty, and without needing external permission to trust what I already know. And what made this real for me wasn't a big decision or some dramatic turning point. It was something very ordinary. I was updating the language, the words on my website, my social media profiles, and the way I described who my work is for. Specifically, I was naming women in law. I was taking a stand. I was making a move. I was making a declaration. And on the surface, it shouldn't have felt heavy because I've spent more than 4 decades inside legal environments. I know that world. I've lived that pace. I understand the pressures, the responsibility, the way expectations compound quietly over time. This wasn't a stretch for me. It wasn't a reach. It wasn't a guess. And yet, as I hovered over the words, changing the language to speak directly to her lived experience, I felt myself hesitate. Not because I didn't believe in the work that I did and that I currently do now, except in a different capacity, and not because I didn't know the women I was speaking to. I was hesitating because once I named it publicly, once I pressed publish, it would be visible. And visibility made it feel final to the point I got into my head and I kept thinking, what if this is the wrong move? What if I'm narrowing too much? What if people judge this before it's fully built? What if someone thinks I'm not qualified to speak to this specifically? What if I can't walk this back once it's out there? What surprised me wasn't that I had those thoughts. It was how familiar they felt, because I realized I wasn't hesitating because I didn't know I was doing. I was hesitating because I was so used to operating in environments where certainty mattered. You see, in law, precision isn't just respected, it's required. Decisions are expected to be defensible, well-reasoned, and grounded in precedent. Being certain is safer than being in process. And so for years, I was valued for being reliable, exact, prepared, unshakable. And somewhere along the way, I internalized a rule I didn't even know I was living by. If you're going to be seen, you need to be certain, clear, almost perfect, really. If you're going to name something publicly, you need to be ready to defend it. And if you're going to choose a direction, you should already know it's the right one, which is why that rule followed me out of legal environments and into my own work. It showed up as restraint, double-checking language, more like second-guessing, if I'm being honest, revisiting decisions and protecting ideas instead of moving them forward and trusting myself. And I soon realized that I wasn't delaying because I needed more information. I was delaying because once I named it clearly, I would no longer be able to hide behind ambiguity. I would be choosing. And choosing meant trusting myself without external confirmation. That was the real fear. Because for a long time, I thought it was about the fear of getting it wrong, when in fact it was the fear of being visible while still evolving. Fear of saying, this is who I serve, and letting that stand. Fear of allowing my lived authority to lead instead of waiting for permission from outside voices. Feeling like I had to have others tell me that my lived experience was valuable instead of me owning that as my truth. This wasn't hesitation in the traditional sense. It was an old internal contract designed to keep me safe in high-stakes environments, showing up again in a season where safety wasn't the goal, alignment was the goal. And that's why I wanted to do a part 2 of this behind the scenes conversation. I wanted to share what it feels like to choose a direction publicly without having every layer finalized yet and doing it anyway. And I also wanted to be honest about this part, that choosing differently didn't suddenly make things feel calm or certain. It brought up fear a lot. Not because the direction was wrong, but because it asked me to stand in it without waiting for reassurance. Not after the decision felt settled, not once I had proof it was the right move, but in the exact moment where I had to decide whether I trusted my experience enough to let it be seen. As I've been sharing this part of my life with you, what I'm realizing is that this didn't start with a decision. It started with noticing myself, noticing how often I would hold back until I could explain something perfectly, how often I delayed saying something out loud until I was sure I could stand behind it without hesitation, how much time I spent rehearsing decisions internally before I ever let them be seen. And I didn't think of it as hesitation at the time. I thought I was being responsible, right? Careful even. But the pattern didn't serve me. It only kept me stuck in indecision. I stayed quiet until I felt ready enough, and I waited until certainty arrived. And honestly, sometimes I didn't even trust certainty because certainty meant visibility. It meant my words would be out there saying, this is me, this is who I serve, this is how I work, without room to hide. So, what I've been sitting with lately is how much energy that has required of me. Not the energy of making the decision, but the energy of protecting it, anticipating questions before they were asked, bracing for misunderstanding before it happened, trying to make choices bulletproof instead of honest, and holding vision and self protection at the same time. And honestly, when you do that long enough, you don't stall because you're unsure. You stall because you're carrying too much internally. And so, what's been different for me recently is how leading with intention actually feels. It's quieter, it's more internal, it's less defensive. There's less explaining before I'm ready, less urgency to justify my choices, and more listening to myself first. Decisions aren't forming from pressure anymore. They're forming from trust in myself, even when I don't have the next steps mapped out fully yet. I'm trusting my experience without needing immediate agreement. I'm trusting my voice without waiting for confirmation and allowing choices to unfold instead of locking them down too early. And what I'm noticing is that authority doesn't come from always being certain that you're right, but from being willing to move, feel, adjust, and stay present with yourself as things take shape, even when the path isn't fully defined yet. So that's what I want to talk through with you today as my lived experience while I'm still inside it. So what I didn't realize until recently is how long I'd been living by a rule I never consciously chose. A rule that said I can move, but only once I'm certain. I can speak, but only once I know how to explain it cleanly, perfectly, if you will. I can be visible, but only when I'm confident. No one will question my choice, right? And the weird thing is, I didn't label this as fear. I told myself I was taking my time because this decision mattered, because the direction mattered, because I didn't want to be careless with something so meaningful. But when I started to pay closer attention to how this rule actually was showing up in my life, the pattern really became impossible for me to ignore because I was delaying my visibility until certainty arrived. I waited to only speak until I could articulate it perfectly. And I spent an enormous amount of time rehearsing decisions internally before letting anyone see them externally and sometimes taking myself out of it. And I wanted to come back to this again because it really, really, really was so important for me to take notice of this. This is what I had been living by. I wasn't just deciding anymore. I was actually preparing to defend my decision, preparing to answer questions that hadn't even been asked, preparing to explain myself before anyone had actually misunderstood me, preparing for reactions that existed mostly in my own head, and certainty became the requirement for movement I used as a shield. And that felt so normal to me that I didn't question it. for years, and especially for the last several months, because it didn't feel restrictive to me. It felt normal. It's something that I had been living for quite a long time. It was how I had learned to operate in environments where precision mattered, where authority mattered, where being respected often meant being sure. I spent decades inside high-stakes professional rooms, law firms, legal departments, environments where decisions carried real weight and visibility came with real consequences. Because in those rooms, hesitation wasn't rewarded, ambiguity wasn't welcomed, and being questioned could feel like a threat to credibility. So, again, somewhere along the way, I learned that certainty equaled safety, that knowing exactly what I was doing before I did it protected me, that being able to explain every move before making it made me harder to challenge, and that staying quiet until I was sure helped me avoid being misunderstood, judged, or dismissed. And this, for me, was about self-preservation. But what I'm seeing now is that the same rule that once helped me navigate those environments actually followed me into places where it no longer belonged, because it followed me into the work I'm doing today as a self-care strategist, into my decisions, into moments where being right isn't the issue, being honest with myself is. And that's where the costs had begun to show up for me, because while I was waiting for certainty, my movement slowed. I delayed action because I was over managing every decision. While I was rehearsing internally, my voice stayed contained. While I was trying to protect the decision, I wasn't actually making it. I wasn't frozen because I didn't know what to do. I was frozen because I was trying to manage how the decision would be received before allowing myself to stand inside it and trust myself. So I didn't trust movement unless it came with proof. I didn't trust my voice unless I could back it up. I didn't trust myself unless I felt externally defensible. And without realizing it, I had outsourced self-trust to the absence of potential pushback. If no one could question it, then it must be right. If I could explain it clearly, then it was safe to choose. If it couldn't be misunderstood, then I was allowed to say it out loud. That was a contract. Not spoken, not written, but lived. And the most confusing realization for me wasn't that this belief existed. It was that I thought it was helping me. I thought it was keeping me grounded, keeping me credible, keeping me protected. But what it was actually doing was keeping me contained. Because like I said in last week's episode, and I'm saying it, declaring it again today, certainty doesn't create clarity. Movement does. Confidence doesn't arrive before action. It forms because of it. And the clarity I was waiting for wasn't something I could think my way into. It only started to show up when I began taking action and having real conversations with real women about real experiences, right? Not carefully worded positioning, just honest dialogue. And that's when something started to shift for me, because I started to see that what I'd been calling patience was actually fear that sounded reasonable. Like, let me just wait a little longer, right? Let me be sure I say it before I say it out loud. Let me protect my decision until I know it won't be questioned, right? I've said this before, but it's the belief that I'm dismantling now, because I know it's not because it made me wrong. I know that it's not because it made me weak. It's because it's no longer aligned with who I am. I don't need to know the entire path before I take the first step. I don't need to protect every decision before it has room to breathe. And I certainly don't need certainty as a prerequisite for trusting myself. What I need is connection, conversation, feedback that informs, not validates. And most of all, permission from myself to move while things are still forming. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm letting go of the habit of narrowing myself before I've given something space to unfold. And I'm allowing myself to explore what's possible without constraints. Once I started seeing what I was doing and the belief that I was holding on to, the one that told me I needed certainty before visibility, I couldn't unsee what it had been costing me, because beliefs like that don't stop you outright. They don't shut things down dramatically. They let you keep going, but just at a slower and heavier pace. And that's why the cost took so long for me to name, to actually notice it. And what I'm realizing now is that the real cost was never obvious while I was inside it, because from the outside, everything still looked fine. I was working, doing most of the things I set out to do, and I kept moving forward. And there was no visible breakdown, no clear stopping point where anyone would have said something's wrong here. But internally, That's where everything felt heavy because for a very long time, I was carrying more than I realized and I was doing it alone. I was holding decisions privately, carrying my vision quietly, managing uncertainty internally. I wasn't leaning on my community like I'd been doing in the past. And the reason it didn't register as a problem is because I was still functioning, which is the sneaky part, right? Because I convinced myself that I was being thoughtful, strategic about timing. But what I was actually doing was protecting any and every decision instead of allowing myself to make it, even if the decision took me down a path that really wasn't where I wanted to go. I wasn't even allowing myself to make any decision, which meant that a lot of my energy wasn't going into action. It was going into containment. Because as I previously mentioned, I was containing the vision until it felt safe enough to share. I was containing my voice until I could anticipate every possible question, that I wouldn't be misunderstood. And that takes an incredible amount of internal energy because I was constantly self regulating, thinking through how something might land, bracing for reactions that hadn't happened, that may never happen, and mentally rehearsing explanations I might need if someone pushes back, not even realizing that these are what I'm mentally rehearsing and that may never ever happen. Someone may never ever question me. Right. And through all of that constant self regulating, I didn't even realize how much of my day was spent hesitating, constantly thinking because I normalized it. I was carrying both the vision and the responsibility of making sure it couldn't be questioned. And I was carrying both the desire to move forward and the pressure to stay protected. When you live like that every day, momentum doesn't just stop. It leaks out. And what I mean by that is opportunities don't disappear entirely. I started to see some of them pass by because when I looked back at my habits over the past several months, there were conversations that I delayed starting. There were things that I saw that I was like, I don't know. And I just kind of hesitated. Connections I actually delayed making, conversations I hesitated to start because reaching out felt like making myself visible before I was ready. And truth be told, that age-old fear of rejection, right? I was fearing rejection. And there was language I held back on using because it just felt too specific, too visible, too final. And every time I waited for certainty, I lost time that I didn't realize I was spending. And I'm not talking about time on my calendar, time in my date, but my energy time, my mental energy that went into holding things privately, my emotional energy that went into preparing for misunderstanding, and my decision energy that got burned up trying to make choices bulletproof instead of honest. And that's what drained me. Not the work itself, not the responsibility, but the internal load of carrying it all alone, carrying it all. It wasn't that I stopped trusting me. It was that only trusted myself once certainty was in place. And that taught me to stop listening when my knowing showed up first, right? What I call my inner canary. Because like I said, she didn't disappear. She just got quiet, really quiet. Because when you're constantly managing your outcomes, there's less space to hear your own signals. And over time, I got so used to operating that way, I didn't even notice I'd stopped checking in. I was still capable, I was still performing, but I wasn't being guided from the inside anymore. And that lack of clarity I felt wasn't confusion, it was disconnection because all of my energy was going into maintaining forward motion, not into alignment. And the missed cost wasn't just internal because like I said, there were opportunities I didn't step into when they first appeared, directions I delayed committing to, and moments where I could have spoken sooner, clearer, and more directly, but I didn't because I was waiting to feel safer. Waiting until my decisions felt irreversible enough to justify. Waiting till I knew how to explain it, my shifts, my community, who I served, why I was doing what I was doing to everyone else before honoring what I wanted for myself. And the hardest part to admit is that it wasn't a lack of external validation that held me back, right? It was the fear of not having validation from myself. It was the fear that if I moved too soon, someone with authority might question it, which then again, I would then flip back inside, like I told you so, right? That my peers might judge it, that I'd choose something visible and I'd have to stand fully inside it. And because I know this world so well, being wrong didn't scare me as much as being seen choosing, seen committing, seen before I could make sure everything was perfect. that perfectionist trap. That's what I was protecting myself from. And that protection comes at a cost, right? Because carrying vision and self-protection at the same time is exhausting. It asks you to be both the creator and the gatekeeper, the leader and the regulator, the one moving forward and the one holding everything back just enough. And that's not a capability issue. That's an internal bandwidth issue. And once I started to see that, I was finally able to name the real problem. That it wasn't because I couldn't do it. It was because I was tired, because I was carrying it alone. And I was carrying the added pressure of believing it had to be fully formed before I could let anyone see it, before I could share my vision. And everything began to shift for me when I allowed myself to name what I was building and who it was for without needing it to be universally understood, when it didn't have to be fully ready in order to announce my next steps, and that I only needed to trust my vision. And when I stopped trying to make it safe for everyone and let it be specific to women in law, when I allowed that for myself to be witnessed instead of contained, to stop holding the weight in isolation and allow my community to support me, those who I lean on, that was where I understood that the real cost wasn't that I lacked strength. It was that I spent the last several months using strength to compensate for not letting myself be supported. And that's why fear quietly took hold. And I know now that it's a price I'm no longer willing to pay. And once I understood that carrying it all internally was costing me so much, I stopped asking, how do I keep managing this? And I actually started to ask, what do I actually want to experience instead, right? Because when you finally see where your energy's been going, it becomes very clear what you want it to go towards. And so what I want now isn't more confidence or more certainty. Of course, we all want to be confident. Of course, we want to be certain, but it's a different relationship with how I lead myself. That's what I really want. I want to make decisions and feel settled inside them, to trust them, not to be braced or preparing to explain and not waiting to see if someone questions me. I really want my choices to feel clean when I make them, still feel clean the next day, not me spiraling into second guess mode. I want to trust that I don't need to run every decision through an invisible room of imagined opinions before I move, because that has been exhausting. I want instead to move forward without the constant internal commentary that says, is this right? Will it make sense? What if someone doesn't agree? And I want to lead from what I know, not from what I'm trying to protect myself from, where my authority comes from experience, not from defensiveness, not over-explaining, not preemptively justifying, and not tightening my language so it can't be questioned. Just me speaking and choosing from a grounded place that says, this is what I see, this is what I know, this is where I'm going, and trusting that I don't need permission to evolve into that. Because I am evolving, whether I name it or not. I want to allow myself to change, right? And to evolve without making that wrong and without shrinking myself to stay unseen while it happens. I want to continue learning about myself and let that learning shape what I build instead of holding myself to an old internal standard that says I should already know. And when I think about what I'm creating now, what I want it to feel like for the women who step into it is simple. I want them to feel relief, like relief and calm and a sense of like, I want them to feel like they don't have to explain themselves. They don't have to translate their pressures. They don't have to justify why they're tired. I want it to be a space where their pace is understood without being discussed, where responsibility doesn't need context, where expectations don't need to be defended, because the women I'm building this community for already live inside high stakes environments. They already carry enough. And so I'm connecting to them and listening to what they need, not assuming what they need, because I really want to listen and understand what supports them inside the level of responsibility that they already carry, so that their internal resources aren't spent on containment or self-management. That's the desire driving me right now. And it's not to build it fast, but to build something honest and supportive for them, the women who already know how to carry responsibility and are ready to stop carrying it alone. So what shifted for me wasn't a single decision or a moment where certainty, relief, or confidence suddenly arrived, right? It wasn't resolved all at once. The shift started happening gradually. And I started noticing that The questions I was asking myself were changing. I was becoming more clear and asking myself better questions, ones that would empower me and help me to focus on forward motion rather than questions running in the background like, is this right? Is it the right move? Is it the right timing? Is it the right direction? Is it going to make sense to other people? Those questions were always there, especially when I was making choices that would make me more visible. But I realized that those questions kept me oriented outwards towards external validation of how something might land, how it might be received, and whether it could be defended. And so when I started to focus on the solutions, the forward motion thinking, I realized that while discernment matters, those questions were keeping me oriented toward managing outcomes instead of staying connected to myself while choosing. So what replaced my questions wasn't just, is this aligned? It became more like, is this true for me? And that question changed how I felt inside my body when I was making decisions, because then I started to notice that when I asked, is this right? My energy tightened, right? I started to doubt myself, get in my head because I was focused on finding what was wrong in my way of thinking. But when I asked, is this true for me? I finally understood that the shift for me wasn't about certainty at all. It was about self-trust in motion. And so I stopped trying to pre-approve my decisions before making them. And I stopped waiting to feel unshakable before allowing myself to choose, and started letting what I already knew from lived experience inform my choices instead of letting the fear of being questioned determine them. That's been the biggest internal change for me. I'm not asking myself to be fearless. I'm asking myself to be honest. Honest about what I know, honest about what I don't, and honest about what feels aligned, even if it isn't fully articulated yet. So now for me, there's less explaining happening internally, less running through conversations in my head that haven't happened, less pressure to justify decisions in advance. I don't feel the same urgency to lock things down or make them sound airtight. And I notice myself listening more, especially before I respond, listening to what's actually present for me instead of what I think should be present. And decisions are starting to form differently now. They don't come from pressure or the need to resolve something quickly. They come from clarity that settles, sometimes slowly, but cleanly. And I've learned to trust that clarity doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just the absence of internal resistance. And sometimes it's noticing that I'm no longer bracing. I'm letting myself be seen choosing. Not once everything's finalized, not once the path is fully mapped out, but while I'm inside it. Because there have been times where that has been really uncomfortable because it goes against the old internal rule that said visibility requires certainty. But it's also been grounding and freeing because I'm no longer trying to protect myself from being human in the process. I'm trusting my voice without needing immediate agreement. I'm trusting that my experience counts, even if someone else doesn't immediately understand it. And I've come to terms with understanding that there's no way to know you're making the right choice without making a choice. Thinking doesn't replace movement. Movement doesn't require certainty. It requires attentiveness, right, to what's real, what's forming, what's asking to be chosen. And evolution doesn't ask for permission. What it asks for is attention and willingness and the courage to stay connected to yourself while things are still unfolding. That's what leading it with intention feels like for me. I feel steadier even when the path isn't fully defined because I'm not trying to outrun myself anymore. I'm not trying to get ahead of my life. I'm letting myself walk with it. And that's the shift. Not a new identity, not a declaration, but an internal decision to trust myself as I am, where I am, and while I'm still becoming. And so what I'm doing right now is meeting the season of my life without trying to resolve it or trying to fix it. I'm letting things be unfinished without treating that as a problem. I notice that when I don't rush to explain myself, there's more room to actually hear myself. Not loud thoughts, but the quieter knowing that shows up when I stop preparing for questions that haven't even been asked. I'm learning that I don't need to prove my way forward in real time. I don't need to narrate every decision as it's happening. I don't need to make my choices easier for other people to understand before I let them be mine. And there's a different kind of steadiness that comes from that, because I'm also noticing how often in the past I would move too quickly towards reassurance, how fast I'd look for confirmation from other people that I was on the right track, and how automatic it was for me to check myself through someone else's eyes before trusting my own inner knowing. So now when something feels unclear, I don't immediately try to smooth it out. I stay with it. I let my inner knowing speak first, even if it's not fully formed yet, even if it doesn't have language, and even if it's just a feeling of yes or not yet. And I'm allowing myself to evolve in real time, out in the open, without over-explaining, without defending where I am or where I'm headed. But it doesn't mean I'm being careless. It just means I'm present. And presence feels very different than pressure. It's how I'm choosing to move right now. Not by getting ahead of myself, not by locking anything down too soon, but by staying close to what feels true as it unfolds. And for this moment in my life, that feels like the most honest way forward. I keep thinking about what I would have wanted during the years I was holding so much internally when I was working full time in this industry that takes a lot from you. Takes a lot of your time, takes a lot of mental and emotional energy. And I know that what I would have wanted, especially as I think about what I'm building now and who I'm building it for, is that I always have wanted to belong to a community where I didn't have to explain the pressure, where I could talk through decisions without defending them. That's what started to take shape for me. That's why I started this. And it's why I'm so passionate about what I'm building now. I know that as high performing women, we don't want to be told what to do. We don't want to shift because someone points something out to us and tells us what to do, right? We shift with our lives. We shift when we finally hear ourselves clearly, when we notice how we've been carrying things, how we've been moving, how much we've been holding on our own. It's that moment of recognition that doesn't just push us forward and keep us motivated and excited for what we do. It settles us. And when we have that kind of awareness, that deeper level knowing, it creates space for a different way of leading ourselves. And that's why what I'm building right now feels less like a pivot and more like a remembering of who I am, of who I'm doing this for, who this work has always been for, and why. Because after being in this world for over 4 decades, I have seen how much pressure women in law carry, how much decision weight we carry, the level of responsibility we carry, and how internal urgency becomes normalized for us. And I've realized that what's been missing is a sense of steadiness, a place to actually feel grounded, to feel seen and understood without having to explain ourselves, to protect our energy while we're living inside those pressure-filled moments. And that's the driving force behind what I'm creating, the community I'm creating. Like I said, I'm in the process of creating something new, the Yes Reset community. It's a private, invitation-only space for women in law who want steadiness and energy support while navigating the decisions and responsibilities they already carry every day. It's not officially open yet because I'm intentionally building it slowly and thoughtfully. But I also want you to know that I want to hear from you. And if you're a woman in the legal profession and you're listening in today and you're thinking, I'd like to know more about that, or that it sounds like something you'd want to be a part of, I want to hear from you. So there's 2 ways to connect. You can send me an email and we can start a conversation. You'll find my contact information in the show notes. Or you can simply apply to be a part of the community by clicking on the link in the show notes. Like I said, I'm building this for you, an environment for women in the legal profession who don't need fixing, but who deserve steadier support as you move through the lives and careers you're already leading. I'm still making decisions while things are forming. I'm still learning what it feels like to trust my experience without waiting for confirmation, without needing everything to be perfect or right or finished. And I'm choosing to stay present with myself instead of rushing towards certainty just to feel settled or validated. And what I'm learning is that intention doesn't ask for answers first. It asks for honesty. It asks for presence and allowing myself to listen within and trust myself more. It asks for the willingness to keep listening even when the next step isn't fully defined yet. And this is what evolution looks like for me right now. It's not dramatic. It's me showing up every day and letting my decisions come from where I actually am, not where I think I should already be. That's how I'm choosing to lead myself in this season. And it feels right. It feels steady. It feels really good. And if you've been listening to these last 2 episodes, my hope isn't that you take anything as something to apply or fix. It's simply that you hear what it sounds like to let yourself be inside the process without rushing to resolve it, without needing to be finished before you're honest. Because sometimes just witnessing that is enough to remember that you're allowed to move this way too. Thanks for listening as I shared my story with you. Until next time, keep dreaming, keep believing, and keep designing your extraordinary life one day at a time. Thank you for joining me on Her Extraordinary Life by Design. I hope you've been inspired and empowered by the incredible stories shared on this show. If you enjoyed this episode and the conversations we've had, I would greatly appreciate if you could take a moment to leave a review. Your feedback and support mean the world to me, and it will help others discover the podcast and join our empowering community. Remember to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Together, we can continue to learn from these amazing women, uncover their extraordinary journeys, and be motivated to create our own lives by design. Thank you again for tuning in. Until next time, stay empowered and keep shaping your extraordinary life one day at a time.
Everyone has heard about the U.S. space program, but what is actually going on at NASA? Get the real story in 4 minutes or less with the NASA Daily podcast from Electricast. Join astronauts and researchers as they conduct groundbreaking experiments, work on the International Space Station, and reach for the stars. NASA Daily, your cosmic update.
Electricast.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Baklaan.
And I'm Eden Alpert.
We're back with a new season of the Unapologetically Fab podcast, where we're all about living your life by your own design.
From family to business to friendships, we bring on great guests to explore living with intention and passion at any age.
So you fabbers, young and old, listen in as we redefine success and embrace life without apologies.
Please join us on Unapologetically Fab, an Electricast production.
See you there.
Electricast. Electricast.